Everybody, Minus here from Pantheon Plus, and today we are going to continue our Races of Terminus series. So if you haven't seen this series before, what's important to say is that it is really a community-based series. We want to hear from you. I'm going to give you some quick points about the race that we're talking about today, and then we are going to allow you then to comment in the YouTube channel, in Reddit, wherever you feel free. And you can also do so in our Discord, which has been open for the last few weeks. And that's kind of the format that I'm going to go through. We're going to talk about the lore of the race. We're going to talk about the classes that race can be. We're going to talk about what we think as far as the classes go, like what kind of stands out in a negative or positive way about the classes, but also what class do we think we'll see the most of for this race. So, and that's up in the air. I'm curious to see what everybody thinks. From there, we're actually going to go ahead and rate them. On a scale of 1 to 10, where do we think they are in the War of Terminus? Do we like how the race has been built by VR? Do we think it should be different? But the 1 to 10 rating is really on you. It doesn't even have to be because of any of the reasons we discuss. And one other piece we will talk about is what other game reminds you of this race or the development of this race. So kind of jump around that a little bit, but that's the format. So let's go ahead and get started with Elves. So elves are a pretty widely renowned race in MMORPGs, in fantasy, in D&D. I mean, you can go on and on and on. People love elves. And it's pretty important that you can't change elves incredibly because the lore and history is so deep and fans of elves are so into them that they almost feel like humans in a sense of that the generic side of them is kind of pre-written. Now, elves have a little bit more give than humans because they are very fantasy-based, obviously. Humans, as we said, the guy down the street is a human. So when we look at elves in Terminus, let me give you a little bit of their history, but what's important here is if you want a great lore representation, please don't listen to me summing it up with how I view it. Go ahead and click that link up there, and you can get a direct reading of the lore from Chris Kane, who is by far the best at this. And he also has a second video, which I'm going to point again right here, and that is on one of the leaders of the elves that they've highlighted in the newsletters, Greyborne. So check those out. That's going to give you a lot of detailed lore for the elves. But here's how I see it. So first and foremost, the elves are known and they're unrivaled in architecture and artistry. So everyone knows that that is a huge strong point for the elves. So that's a big painting brush for kind of understanding their culture. And they're naturally physically stronger and possess the ability of the arcane incredibly well. So that allows them to really drive the magica of the different classes that the race can actually be. One of the interesting things that they note about the elves in Terminus is that they often mark their bodies with tattoos, paints, and that type of thing, and it's usually done to celebrate the dead. And the reason I say that is because the elves are very tied into their past. They really celebrate their past. Their youth is driven by the past. They do not forget how they came to be. They spend more time honoring their past, almost more than they are actually honoring their future. And they've shown to be a very religious race, very much so into the elven gods, which is interesting. A lot of outside races, from what we've been told in lore, look at the elves as strange because of their very high religious beliefs and their past culture and that kind of thing. So it's an interesting piece. Now, what's confusing about the elves is that when you read the lore or you watch Chris's lore, they're very distinct in saying there are two types of elves, the Ashen Elves and the Ember Elves. Now, with that being the case, they also reference the Lucent Elves quite a bit, and then they have a part of their community known as the Splinter Folk, which are elves who live in the shadows, and they kind of split off to go to the world on their own, which in the elven culture in Terminus is sort of forbidden and not common. They really act as a collective. So when someone in the elven culture jumps out into the world on their own or hides in the shadows, they're seen as an outcast. And that splintering away is what earned them the name of Splinter Folk. So they predominantly talk about Ashen Elves and Ember Elves, but it seems that there's some of the Lucent Elf culture, which is really far back culture, at least from my understanding, and then these Splinter Folk that are kind of the rogue elements of their culture. Now, they come from the home planet, and get ready for me to butcher this, Seolen, And in this planet, they had 3 sections of the world that were controlled by different groups of elves, and they got along and things were great. But of course, jealousy loomed. And basically, the Northerners started to attack and kill those that lived in the West and in the South. And they became known as the Tormentari. It's very close to being the Tormented, or the Tormentors is the way I kind of take that. And they went through and they just absolutely destroyed these races. So what happened is the Elven gods jumped in and said, let's get them out of there, and pulled all the survivors to the east. Well, what happened is they then found the basis of the Elven culture is around these huge life-giving trees. And we've seen that in a lot of games with huge life-giving trees. We saw that in WoW with the Night Elves were built around a large tree. So it's interesting that they went that route with these elves that, the first tree, which was known as Lumos, was just a massive, massive tree. And they said it was so big that to get around the base of the tree, it would take them a half a day. And the roots in that tree actually represented all the different seasons, whether it was fiery for the heat, wintry. So they actually had seasons that were imbued in these roots that were just massive. So it kind of gives you a little bit of idea. You have this race that was kind of together, fractured, saved. Now they're living within this tree that's the vision of their life. Well, those Tormentari, they actually ended up finding them, and they go in and they take the Beasts of Tor, which I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more about. But the Beasts of Tor were what the original elf groups were sort of united with in fighting. So on their home planet, the Beasts of Tor were the worst things. It was what they were always united to fight against. And these Tormentari were actually now taking these beasts and working with them to fight against their own kind. So what happened is they found them at the tree, they found them at Lumos, and they actually burned it to the ground. And so what exactly happened was that the elves were rubbing the ashes of the tree on themselves in mourning and in fear of this tree dying. Well, the elven gods who helped them get to the tree came through and were able to actually save the seed of Lumos. And it told them of a time where they would be reborn with this seed. And this seed was planted into Terminus. And that's what caused the elves that were remaining there to go to Terminus and start their new lives. And this new tree was called Lucent, which if the Lucent Elves, that's why I kind of think that the term of Lucent Elves are the elves that first came over to Terminus. That's sort of what they were known as, versus the ones that stayed there warring and fighting. So it was a pretty interesting lore and a lot of torment and self-conflict between the elves there for a group that is well seen to be very united and together. They would again have their tree burned to the ground, and those elves that would survive and forge a new life with the tree would be called the Ember Elves. So this was done because of the wars that took place on Terminus. And for those that don't know, the original 3 races the original 3 playable races were the dwarves, the elves, and then the ogres. So the elves have been on Terminus almost as long as any of the races that we're familiar with that we can play. So a lot of rambling, a little bit of lore there, but it gives you an idea of what paints them. They've been through a lot of turmoil within their community, but they still hold true to their values. And I think that's why some of the other races see them as strange. They've keep holding true to these values that are essentially eventually ruining them or causing this disdain and issues within their community, but they still hold true and they still teach their youth about the past. And that's really big about the elves. So there you go. For what it's worth, tell me if you agree or disagree with the way I've kind of taken that, but it's pretty interesting. Okay, that's a ton of lore. This is probably the longest video I've done so far with lore, so let's jump right into classes. The elves can be bards when that's available, druids, enchanters, rangers, rogues, shaman, summoner, warrior, and wizards. Well, from their lore, we understand that they're able to be arcane, so classes like wizard and summoner, that makes a lot of sense. I have no problem with that. Bard can really fit a lot, so I don't have a problem with that. I'd say that overall, there's nothing super surprising that they can't be. And I think that most of the classes they can be are pretty good. Now, I would say that the shaman's a little strange. Now, again, it depends on how you look at Shaman as a player. Is Shaman like a WoW Shaman to you, or is Shaman more D&D style or EverQuest style? There's variances between all three of those. For me, I really look at a Shaman as like a master of elements, and I see them very opposite of a Druid, and I see that Elves, to me, very much so represent the Druid with the tree life and everything that's happened with it. So the Druid and Ranger, which we've also commented before in these videos, seem to be being pulled apart a tiny bit by VR, where in EverQuest they're very close together and united. I see the Elf as a natural of being in the woods and in the tree of life they've lived around. So for me, I would tell you that I think that Druid will definitely be the most played Elf class to me personally. So let me know how you feel about that. In regards to what do these feel like? So I'm gonna be honest, coming into this video, I was actually really down on the Elves. I thought they would be one of my lowest made races. The concept art originally was very frail, female. I did not like the original concept art. It reminded me of Liv Tyler from Lord of the Rings, and I just didn't like it. It felt like it was dressed in green to represent the Wood Elf, but that it looked and felt frail like a High Elf. And yeah, maybe I'm just traditional, but I don't like mixing Wood Elf and High Elf. And I also don't like the fact that Terminus right now has one elf. Now, digging into the lore and having the Splinter Folk, the Ember Elves, the Ashen, the Lucid Elves, maybe we'll see different variations, but when you just have elves, that means you don't have Dark Elf. It means you don't have Half Elf, which is one of my all-time favorites. It means you don't have Wood Elf, you don't have High Elf, you just have Elf. And that's one of the biggest problems I have. So when I look at what does this remind me of, I guess it's Lord of the Rings-ish, but still it's too mixed of all the different elves we sort of know and love. So I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking this, you guys tell me. But at the end of the day, I would say that I do compare them mostly to, I guess to like the Liv Tyler Lord of the Rings character or the High Elves of EverQuest, but then you just have this tree background. I don't know. I want to call them Wood Elves, but I can't because they don't look anything like a Wood Elf. They look so much more like a noble High Elf. So I don't know. Maybe we need to see more art. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Greyborne does look a little more Wood Elf. I don't know. I kind of get this High Elf vibe. So you guys tell me what you think if you're more of an expert on elves than me. So that brings it to the end. What am I going to rate them out of 10? Well, coming into the video before I did any extra research, and I've read all this stuff before, but I kind of read it in passing and I try to take notes. But this, when I do these videos, I get real into it. And I will tell you that it would have probably been a 2 before I really dug into their lore. I thought of them as very generic from their look, the feel, and the little I knew about them. But digging into the lore, it is a little more complicated. So I don't think giving them a 2 is very fair. Now the odds of me playing one, very poor. You give me a Half Elf, I'm in. But the odds of me playing an elf in Terminus is very, very low. And that's going to take a play in my voting. So I would have probably rated them a 2 before I researched them. I'm not going to play them. And I have to consider where I've rated other races that I would play or that I at least appreciate. So I'm going to say I'm going to give elves a 4. I think that's fair for me. I think there's going to be a lot of people who rate them a lot higher and we'll probably see a ton of elves. But that's where I'm going to go with it. So please, in the comments in YouTube, let us know on Reddit. You can let us know in Discord now that we've opened up our Discord. So you can access that from PantheonPlus. In the top, you'll see a link that says join Discord. The last thing I'll say is we had a great time last Thursday on Pantheon Plus U. I really hope we see more of you out here this Thursday. We'll continue it again. It's a great community live show. So outside of these content videos, we'll be doing that as well. So again, elves, 4 overall. Think we'll see a lot of druids. What do you guys think? Thank you.